Thank you for being here when you have so many other options. Now, let's begin. This happened years ago when I was 19. I'm now in my mid-20s. I still remember this very clearly because of how creeped out I was. Back then, I was living 600 plus miles away from my parents in a different state. Even though there was a distance, my mom and I still talked on the phone at least twice a week, and we were still really close. So when we found out her cancer was back, I didn't think twice about dropping everything to drive down to see her. A plane ticket would be too expensive, and I had a 10-year-old Toyota that might have been a bit beat up, but still got me from A to B cheaply and quietly. My parents weren't thrilled at the idea of me driving the 11 hours by myself, but my mind was made up. So they offered me a deal. I would stop at a rest stop every 2 to 3 hours and stretch my legs and call them. And in exchange for this courtesy, they would pay for my gas. If I did not call within the 3-hour window, though, they would assume that I had been in an accident and would call me repeatedly, interrupting the audiobook or podcast that they knew that I would have on. I accepted the deal, and that's why I was at this particular rest stop at 2:45 a.m. This was actually one of the nicer stops. Well lit, multiple vending machines that did not have huge cages around them. The payphone was not broken, and it looked clean. There were a couple cars there with people sleeping in them. I still had 15 minutes before I had to check in with my parents. I got out of my car and stretched, and then almost jumped out of my skin when I heard a man's voice right behind me. Miss, can I ask you for a favor?" I turned around, and he's leaning against my car. I have no idea how he got there so fast. I didn't see him when I parked, but there he was, uncomfortably close to me. He looked like he's in his 40s. He didn't look dirty or twitchy. He was too close, but his body language did not scream threatening. And even though I was 19 years old, barely over 5 feet, and at that point in my life, 110 pounds soaking wet. And even though I had already binged a lot of true crime media and knew the dangers of a girl my age alone at night with an out-of-state license plate, my dumb self asked what he needed. He told me that he accidentally locked his keys and his phone in his truck, and asked if he could borrow my phone real quick to call his friend. It will just take a second, and it will really help him out. And I almost handed him my phone. I was reaching into my pocket to hand it to him with a Pollyanna, no problem, and then I actually looked at his face. Like I said, this rest stop was surprisingly well lit, and this guy looked really normal, except for his eyes. He had dead shark eyes. You know what I'm talking about. It's the Ted Bundy, Dick Cheney, actress in a Glade commercial who's trying to convince us that she's in love with some dumb guy who doesn't know how an air freshener works eyes. They're smiling, but the eyes are vacant and creepy and staring way too hard. I got that feeling. That runaway feeling. I knew immediately not to hand this guy my only way to call for help. So I put on my best customer service smile and told him, "Oh, I'm sorry, but I don't have a charger and I need to save all my battery for the tracking app that my parents have on my phone. And I need the juice to call my parents, which I actually have to do right now. But good luck." And I turned and walked about 20 feet away. And he does not leave. He was still just leaning against my car, watching me. And now I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to leave him alone with my car, because he creeped me out. And he had a serial killer face. So going to the bathroom is out, but I also wanted to get away from him, prove that I'm not going to help, and maybe he'll leave. I could technically get into the car, but I would have to get really close to him unless I crawled over my passenger side seat. And he's not moving. So I did the first thing that came to mind. I called my dad. And my dad, for the first time that night, did not pick up the phone. When I heard his voicemail, I glanced back. The guy still had not moved. He's standing still, staring at me. So I faked a phone conversation with my dad. I angled my body so that the guy couldn't see that I had hung up the phone, and loudly said that I should be home in about 30 minutes, when in reality, I was still at least 4 hours away. I mentioned exactly where I was and reassured the fake caller that this was a good rest stop with plenty of lighting and a couple of visible security cameras. The guy still had not moved, and I am running out of steam on this fake conversation. In the years since, I've thought of a lot of things I could have said while pretending to talk to my dad, but in that moment, I was beginning to seriously freak out, and my mind went blank. So I hung up and did not know what to do. I had hoped the fake phone call would scare him off, but he was still leaning against my car. I stalled for another couple of minutes. I bought cookies from the vending machine. I walked around a little. At this point, he's been leaning against my car staring at me for at least 10 minutes. I honestly debated waking up one of the men sleeping in their parked cars and asking for help. And just the thought of having to wake someone up to help me get into my own car annoyed me enough that I stopped stalling and headed right back to my car. I decided that unless he touched me, I'm just going to pretend that he's not there. He waited until I was unlocking my car door before he started talking to me again. He told me again that he really needs to use my phone. He's stranded here unless he can call his friend to bring the spare keys. He's not angry or begging. His voice sounds weirdly friendly, but he had been creepily watching me for way too long while blocking my exit, so I'm not falling for it. I almost pointed out the working payphone just in case I'm wrong about this, and I was being rude to a guy who needs help. But then he leaned forward as I was getting in, and I lost all nerve and slammed and locked the door as fast as possible. He didn't move until I started the car and put it in reverse, and then he finally stepped back and let me pull out. I didn't even have my seatbelt on. I was so focused on getting away from him. And then halfway out of the rest stop, my mom called me. My mom, who would freak out if I didn't pick up, and who was already sick. And I needed to put on my seatbelt. I could still see him in my mirror. He was standing right next to where I was parked with his back to me. He was far enough away that I felt okay parking again to answer the phone, but I kept my engine running, and I kept watching him. I don't want my mom to worry, so I told her everything is fine, where I am, my ETA, etc. Now that I was in my locked car away from him, I was beginning to feel like I had overreacted. She scolds me about speeding, and I tune her out, because the guy is moving now. As my mom lectures me about road safety, I watch the guy cross to a truck, unlock the door, and get in. The keys being locked in no longer seemed to be an issue for him. I watched the truck head back out to the freeway and drive out of sight. I had to pretend to be fine to not upset my mom. I didn't get back onto the road for another 20 minutes, and when I did not speed. I did not want to see that truck. I found out years later that the closest city to that rest stop has a major problem with sex trafficking, and that girls who look like they don't live nearby, or maybe look like they are living out of their cars, tend to be targets. I don't know if that was what was happening, or if he was trying to just scare me into handing over my phone.